Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, June 16th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today brings a high of 91.1 degrees and a low of 62.8 degrees, so please stay hydrated and seek shade if you are planning to spend any time outside. Coming up, we are diving into the reasons behind the federal investigation surrounding Governor Gavin Newsom and his wife. We will also examine how a recent fatal B-52 crash is shaping the conversation regarding the future of Air Force radar modernization. In addition to these reports, we have several other stories to cover that you will not want to miss. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We're starting with a major political and legal story out of California that's reverberating all the way to Washington. Governor Gavin Newsom is accusing the Trump administration of putting him on a so-called hit list, and federal investigators are reportedly digging deep into his and his wife's finances. For more, we're joined by our political correspondent, Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. This story really exploded yesterday, June 15th, when Governor Newsom released a video statement going directly at the Trump administration. He accused the Department of Justice of running what he called a fishing expedition, basically launching an investigation without specific evidence and hoping something sticks. And remember, Newsom is widely seen as a top contender for the 2028 Democratic presidential nomination, so the political stakes here are enormous.
A fishing expedition is a serious charge. Who else does Newsom say is on this alleged hit list?
According to reports from CalMatters and LAist, Newsom described himself as the latest addition to what he called a Trump enemies list. He grouped himself with former FBI Director James Comey, New York Attorney General Letitia James, Senator Adam Schiff, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. The New York Times and MSNBC have noted Newsom has long cast himself as Trump's chief antagonist, serving as a vocal surrogate for the Biden-Harris campaign. So his framing here is that this is political retribution, plain and simple.
And he's connecting this to Project 2025, right? Walk us through that link.
That's right. Newsom's fears tie directly to the broader Project 2025 transition plan, which proposes reclassifying civil service workers as political appointees. The idea is that this would give the president far greater control over the Justice Department. According to CalMatters, Newsom's office believes federal agents are, quote, abusing the grand jury process, end quote, by combing through years of random documents. They're even demanding records about deeply personal matters, including the couple's marriage.
That's striking. But the DOJ is telling a very different story about when these investigations actually started.
Exactly. Sources within the DOJ told CalMatters and Jefferson Public Radio, also known as IJPR, that there have actually been at least 2 criminal investigations ongoing for a year in the Eastern District of California. And these probes are bifurcated. One is focused on a corruption scandal involving former staff, and the other is centered on the Newsoms' personal and nonprofit finances. So, according to the DOJ, this didn't start as a political vendetta.
Let's take those one at a time. Tell us about the corruption case involving Newsom's former chief of staff.
That's the Dana Williamson case, and it's a major pillar of the federal inquiry. According to the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, Williamson was indicted in November 2025 and then pleaded guilty just last month, in May 2026. She admitted to felony charges including conspiracy to commit bank and wire fraud and lying to the FBI. What's interesting is that this investigation actually originated back in late 2022 or early 2023 during the Biden administration, so well before Trump returned to office.
So what was Williamson actually accused of doing?
The scheme involved funneling $225,000 from a dormant campaign account belonging to Xavier Becerra. Becerra, you may remember, is the former Biden health secretary, and he's now a frontrunner to succeed Newsom as governor. Williamson's guilty plea has not directly implicated the governor, but CalMatters reports that Newsom's office believes prosecutors pivoted toward him as a, quote, dead end, end quote, reaction, after failing to link him to Williamson's embezzlement scheme.
Okay, that's track one. Now what about the second investigation involving the first partner, Jennifer Newsom?
This one is arguably more sensitive politically. The second track involves Jennifer Newsom's finances and her nonprofit organizations, the California Partners Project and the Representation Project. According to ABC News and the Los Angeles Times, federal agents are scrutinizing $1.9 million in what are called behested payments. Those are charitable donations made to a nonprofit at the request of a public official. The governor solicited these for the California Partners Project in 2024 and 2025.
And there's a specific donation that's raising eyebrows, isn't there?
Yes, a $1 million donation from the Federated Indians of Greater Rancheria. Investigative reports highlighted by CalMatters and LAist suggest a potential pay-to-play arrangement. The timeline is what's really catching investigators' attention. In August 2024, shortly after the first installment of that donation, Newsom urged the Interior Department to reject a $700 million casino project by the Koi Nation, which would have rivaled the Greater Rancheria's existing facility.
And there was a second donation after that, right?
Right. In May 2025, after a second donation came in, Newsom filed a federal lawsuit to block the Koi Nation's project. So you can see why investigators are looking at the sequence here. Whether there's actual coordination or just unfortunate timing is exactly what the grand jury appears to be examining. The governor's team strongly denies any quid pro quo arrangement.
I also understand the IRS is involved on a separate piece of this. What are they looking at?
That's correct. The Los Angeles Times reports that the IRS is investigating Jennifer Newsom's personal taxes and her production company, Girls Club, LLC. Investigators are reportedly examining licensing fees and salary payments totaling somewhere between $1.5 million and $3.7 million. Those payments came from her nonprofit, the Representation Project, over the last decade. So this is a pretty comprehensive look at the family's financial network.
Ethan, this brings us back to the core dispute. Did these probes start politically, or did they start with whistleblowers?
That's really the central point of contention. While Newsom claims the Trump administration directed the DOJ to target him, the Los Angeles Times and CalMatters report that the inquiries into the personal finances were actually sparked in mid-2025. The reporting says they came from, quote, local sources and whistleblowers, end quote, within the California state government in Sacramento. So according to that reporting, it wasn't a Washington directive at all.
What is the DOJ itself saying about the political motivation question?
Sources within the DOJ, speaking to The Guardian, flatly rejected the claim of political motivation. They asserted the investigations are based on evidence and local leads established before the change in administration. That said, the Trump DOJ, currently under the oversight of acting officials like Todd Blanche, has overseen an intensification of the grand jury process and the recent wave of interviews. So even if it didn't start politically, critics argue it has accelerated under Trump.
Let's talk about where things stand right now. Have the Newsoms actually been subpoenaed?
Not personally, at least not yet. Newsom's office confirms neither the governor nor the first partner have been personally served with federal subpoenas, but they believe subpoenas have been issued to financial institutions and businesses associated with the family. That includes their hospitality company, Plumpjack, which is currently held in a blind trust. So the financial paper trail is clearly being pulled.
And what about people in their orbit? Are agents talking to friends and associates?
Yes, and this is one of the most striking aspects. Newsom's office reports federal agents have contacted more than a dozen friends, former employees, donors, and business associates. The governor says agents have been, quote, knocking on doors, end quote, to demand records and personal correspondence. That's an aggressive posture, and it's part of why Newsom is sounding the alarm so publicly right now.
Is his legal team pushing back through any official channels?
They are. Newsom's lawyers have filed Freedom of Information Act requests, or FOIA requests, with the DOJ. They want to determine whether there's been any communication between the White House and the Justice Department about these specific probes. If they find a paper trail showing political coordination, that would be a major development. For now, though, that's still an open question.
And what are we hearing officially from the White House and federal prosecutors?
The White House has referred all questions to the DOJ. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of California stated they, quote, do not confirm or deny the existence of investigations, end quote. That's a standard procedural response, and it was reported by both The Guardian and CalMatters. So we're not getting much daylight from the official side.
Big picture, Ethan, how is Newsom playing this politically?
He's remaining defiant, and frankly, he's using the investigation to bolster his national profile. He's casting himself as a victim of what critics on the left call lawfare. Meanwhile, federal authorities appear to be moving forward with a broad forensic audit of the family's financial network, including their connections to state contractors and donors. So both tracks, the legal and the political, are accelerating at the same time, and this story is only going to grow.
A truly complicated and consequential story. Ethan, thank you so much for breaking it down for us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Grace.
We're following another major story this morning, a deadly military aviation accident out in the California desert. Joining me now is our reporter Chloe with the latest. Chloe, good morning. What happened out there?
Good morning, Grace. Yesterday, June 15th, 2026, at roughly 11:20 a.m. local time, a U.S. Air Force B-52H Stratofortress crashed shortly after takeoff from Edwards Air Force Base. That's in the Mojave Desert, about 100 miles north of Los Angeles. All 8 people on board were killed. Military officials are describing the crash as, quote, unsurvivable, end quote. And PBS NewsHour and the BBC report the aircraft burst into flames on impact.
8 lives lost. That is just devastating. What did the scene actually look like?
According to that same reporting from PBS NewsHour and the BBC, the impact left a massive blackened scar across the desert floor, with a towering plume of smoke visible for miles. Aerial footage from KKAL, carried by CNN, showed virtually nothing recognizable left of the airframe. It really gives you a sense of just how violent this crash was. Emergency crews from the 412th Test Wing responded almost immediately.
And tell us about the specific aircraft involved. I understand it had a name.
It did. The bomber was serial number 60-0061, nicknamed the Spirit of Aggieland II. CNN and reporting compiled by Gemini Flash note that this particular plane only arrived at Edwards back in December of 2025, after a major retrofit at Boeing's San Antonio facility. So this was a relatively fresh aircraft in terms of its modernization work, and that's part of what makes the loss so significant for the Air Force.
So this wasn't a routine flight then. What was the mission?
No, this was a developmental test mission supporting the B-52 radar modernization program known as the RMP. The crew was evaluating the AN/APQ-188 Active Electronically Scanned Array Radar. That's a Raytheon-produced system designed to replace Cold War-era analog equipment. It's a critical piece of the B-52J upgrade path, which is meant to keep these Eisenhower-era bombers flying all the way through 2050.
Wow, planes designed in the 1950s still expected to serve another 24 years. Why 8 people on board, though? Isn't that more than usual?
That's a great question, Grace. A standard B-52H crew is 5 personnel: the pilot, co-pilot, radar navigator, and electronic warfare officer. But because this was what's called a heavy developmental test, essentially using the aircraft as a flying laboratory, the crew was larger. CNN, the BBC report. It was a mixed crew of uniformed military personnel, government civilians, and defense contractors all working together.
And we know some of those contractors worked for Boeing, right?
That's right. Boeing has confirmed 2 of its employees were among the victims, identified as specialist radar engineers. According to experts cited by Gemini Flash, the additional 3 personnel on flights like this typically include flight test engineers monitoring real-time telemetry, and safety observers evaluating things like the new high-definition touchscreen interfaces in the cockpit. So you really had the brain trust of this program on board.
Have the names of the victims been released yet?
Not as of this morning, June 16th. The Air Force is observing the standard 24-hour window after next-of-kin notifications before publicly identifying the deceased. But Colonel James Hayes, who's the deputy commander of the 412th Test Wing, called the loss, quote, tragic, end quote, and noted that the mission involved some of the Air Force's most seasoned pilots and engineers. So we know this was a deeply experienced crew.
Do we have any early sense of what may have caused the crash?
It's far too early for official conclusions, but there are some clues. Witnesses reported seeing light to moderate smoke shortly after takeoff, followed by a sharp descent. Aviation safety expert Jeff Gazzetti told PBS NewsHour that the crash's proximity to the runway suggests a possible flight control malfunction, a catastrophic engine failure, or potentially an issue with the experimental equipment being tested. The military also has not confirmed whether the bomber was armed at the time.
And the investigation itself? How does that unfold from here?
It's already moving in several layers. An interim safety board was established immediately to secure the site and preserve evidence. A formal Safety Investigation Board, or SIB, will conduct a root cause analysis over the next 30 days. Then a broader Accident Investigation Board, the AIB, will run a legal and public review that could take up to 6 months, so we may be waiting a while for the full picture.
What about the black box? Have they recovered the flight data recorder?
Not yet. Colonel Hayes confirmed that recovery teams are currently searching the debris field for it, but the task is complicated by the intensity of the post-impact fire. As we mentioned, very little of the airframe survived intact, so finding and reading that recorder is going to be challenging but essential. That data will be central to understanding what went wrong in those final moments.
Let's put this in historical perspective. How does this compare to past B-52 accidents?
This is now the deadliest B-52 crash since 1982, when 9 crew members died during a training flight at Mather Air Force Base near Sacramento. CNN also notes a 2008 crash off the coast of Guam that claimed 6 lives. Interestingly, the 8 fatalities figure also mirrors a 1956 crash at Castle Air Force Base and initial, later corrected reports from a 1962 crash at Edwards. So this is historically significant for the fleet.
And how have political leaders responded?
Condolences have come in from across the political spectrum. California Governor Gavin Newsom called the event, quote, heartbreaking, end quote, and offered support to the Edwards community. Similar messages came from House Speaker Mike Johnson and Secretary of the Air Force Troy E. Mike. Members of Congress, including Representative Vince Fong and Jay Obernolte, also expressed their condolences to the families and the base.
You mentioned earlier the radar modernization program has had some problems. Tell us more about that.
Yes, this is where the story gets more complicated, Grace. According to Gemini Flash and Breaking Defense, the RMP has been plagued by both technical and financial hurdles. It recently suffered what's called a Nunn-McCurdy breach after unit costs rose by nearly 20%, bringing the total budget to over $3.3 billion. That's the kind of cost overrun that triggers automatic congressional scrutiny.
And the technical concerns, what were those?
The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, along with the Director Operational Test and Evaluation, known as DOT&E, previously raised red flags. Those included the legacy radome design causing heat dissipation issues and unreliable fiber optic communication lines between the radar's processors. So there were known engineering concerns before this flight. Schedule-wise, initial operational capability had already slipped from 2027 to 2030.
So this aircraft wasn't just any test plane, it was central to the whole program.
Exactly. Serial 60-0061 was the lead testbed for the entire radar modernization program. Losing it, along with the engineers who knew the system best, is expected to be a significant setback for the Air Force's modernization timeline. Remember, the whole point of the RMP is to keep these bombers viable through 2050, so any delay ripples out for decades.
What's the status at Edwards itself right now? Is the base operating normally?
Edwards Air Force Base has officially reopened, but local flight operations remain grounded through Tuesday as the community mourns the lost crew. It's a relatively tight-knit community out there in the high desert, and many of the personnel involved in test missions know each other well. So this is being felt very personally on base, not just professionally.
And just to be clear for our listeners, this was a test flight, not a combat mission, correct?
That's correct. This was purely a developmental test mission inside the United States. Evaluating new radar technology, there was no combat element. The aircraft took off from Edwards and was operating in the airspace it has used for decades for exactly this kind of evaluation work. That's part of why the proximity of the crash to the runway is drawing so much attention from investigators.
Chloe, before we let you go, what should we be watching for in the days ahead?
A few things, Grace. First, the release of the victims. Names once next of kin notifications are complete. Second, any updates from Colonel James Hayes and the 412th Test Wing on the recovery of the flight data recorder. And third, watch for congressional reaction, given the existing Nunn-McCurdy breach and the GAO and DOT&E warnings. This crash is almost certain to intensify oversight of the entire B-52J upgrade path going forward.
Chloe, thank you so much for walking us through all of this on a very difficult morning. We appreciate your reporting.
Thank you, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. A diplomatic bridge is being built, but the water beneath is anything but calm, as the June 14th announcement of a preliminary United States and Iran peace framework faces a wave of resistance. President Donald Trump has outlined a 14-point memorandum that includes a 60-day ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, hoping for a straightforward path to peace. However, some lawmakers are thuning out the proposal, as Senate Majority Leader John Thune and others expressed skepticism this Monday, citing a lack of formal briefings and deep concerns regarding the enforcement of compliance benchmarks. Across the pond, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not willing to let his guard down, vowing to maintain a military buffer in Lebanon and continue strikes against what he calls Iran's terror arms, regardless of the agreement. This Pakistan-mediated deal could mark the finale of a 15-week war that began in 2025, often called the 100-day conflict. But the ceremonial signing scheduled for this Friday in Geneva remains on thin ice. Stakeholders are currently laboring over the reported $12 billion to $20 billion in sanctions relief for Tehran. While G7 leaders meeting in France are making the ceasefire a priority, the timeline for opening the sea lanes remains murky due to necessary demining operations. In the world of entertainment, Fox is streaming ahead with a blockbuster announcement. On June 15, 2026, Fox Corporation entered a definitive agreement to acquire the streaming pioneer Roku in a deal valued at approximately $22 billion. Fox is clearly trying to stay in the hunt for viewers, offering Roku shareholders $160 per share, consisting of $96 in cash and 0.97 shares of Fox Class A common stock. CEO Lachlan Murdoch called it a defining moment, channeling Fox's live sports and news into a platform reaching over 100 million global households. This merger creates the third largest player in United States television, but it may face a remote chance of smooth sailing as the Justice Department examines if Fox will keep the platform open. The deal is expected to close in the first half of 2027. Not to be outdone, the Department of Justice has given the green light to a really big deal, formally approving the $111 billion merger between Paramount Skydance and Warner Bros. Discovery. After an 8-month investigation, officials concluded on June 12 that the combined entity, led by David Ellison, won't hurt competition but will instead help these studios keep pace with tech giants. This merger unites heavy hitters like HBO Max, CNN, and CBS News. However, California Attorney General Rob Bonta might still try to cut the scene with an independent lawsuit, and regulators in the United Kingdom and Europe are still reviewing the script. In health news, doctors are calling the shots, as the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists released their own maternal immunization schedule on June 10, 2026. In a move that is truly delivering on independent care, they have broken away from federal guidelines issued by the Centers for Disease Control. While Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently deprioritized certain shots, this group and 13 other medical societies are sticking to their guns, recommending routine COVID-19 and flu vaccinations for pregnant patients to combat misinformation. States like Rhode Island and Illinois are already following this independent lead, proving that when it comes to health, doctors want to be the ones in the delivery room. Finally, voters in Oklahoma are waging a battle at the polls today over State Question 832. This ballot initiative seeks to raise the state's minimum wage from the federal floor of $7.25 to $15 by 2029. The plan starts with a jump to $12 in 2027, followed by annual $1.50 increases. While proponents say the cost of living has gone up 50%, the Farm Bureau is plowing ahead with opposition, worried about the impact on rural economies. With over 350,000 workers potentially seeing a raise, this vote is a high-stakes test of whether conservative voters are ready to raise the bar for pay. 30 other states have already set floors above the federal rate, and Oklahomans will decide sooner than later if they will join them. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.